welcome to the special election edition of the Chiefs. And of course, with us are Lucy Cruz Valdez, the head of News 5, and coming online in a few minutes.
Hi, Ed.
Coming online in a few minutes would be Ana Marie Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Robbie Alampay of One News. Pero wala pa sila. But let's start the ball rolling. Of course,
Yes, we should.
we are going to talk about the U.S. elections. Pero before that, let's talk first about the Super Typhoon that hit our country. Let's have a briefer first from the Office of Civil Defense. Joining us is OCD Administrator and NDRRMC Executive Director Undersecretary Ricardo Jalad. Sir, good evening thank you for joining us and good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Ed and Lucy. Good evening to everyone.
Yes, sir. Sir, pa-briefing po muna. Ano po yung latest nating count in terms of casualties and damage?
Well, latest count as of this morning, 17 dead, 16 of that's Region 5, Bicol, and 1. And we also have 2 injured, 1 in Region 5 and 1 in Calabarzon. And as the other effects are effects on the roads and bridges. 37 road sections and 4 bridges are not passable. There is water interruption in Albay, Kamsun, Norte, Catanduanes, Masbate, and Sorsogon, as well as power outages. I think the whole of the Region 5 has no electrical power as of now. And initial cost of damages to agriculture is about 1.74 billion. That's from the Department of Agriculture. And as of now, the operations like road clearing, restoration of utilities through the DOE's Task Force Kapatiran, and providing humanitarian assistance to the affected population.
Yes, sir. Sir, wala na pong, hindi na po tataas yung
casualties.
Opo, yung casualties po natin.
Yeah, we're praying na hindi na maragdagan ito, but the DILG is on top of validating the dead and missing, and sana hindi na madagdagan. Yun nga ang ating prayer.
In terms of number of homes destroyed, number of households who may have lost their homes, meron ho ba tayong figures? Kasi ang dami ho talagang nawasak na mga kabahayan no?
Lucy, wala pang exact figure. Estimates pa lang yung ating nakukuha from the local executives.
Yes.
Like for example, from in Catanduanes, ang estimate ni Governor dyan as 10,000, 3,000 yung partially damaged. Ganon din sa mainland Bicol, wala pa rin tayong exact figures. Nasa assessment pa lang yung ating mga local government units ngayon. And tinutulungan naman ang mga national government agencies. In fact, we deployed teams in Catanduanes bringing communication equipment, and then tomorrow we'll be dispatching.
Siyempre, pag nawala ng bahay, it will require major rehabilitation, no? Not to mention evacuation, temporary shelters. Ano pong mga plano po kaya sa mga ganon? Ano po usually yung operations ng NDRRMC pagdating sa mga ganyan?
So pinag-uusapan namin kanina sa response clusters meeting na hindi lang ito simpleng pagbibigay ng pagkain. We really should use the resources available as reported by the Secretary of DBM, Secretary Abisado. We have 3.2 billion, and we should look at extending financial assistance to all those with damaged houses. And it would be, well, aside from those, yung mga cash for work programs and assistance to farmers by the Department of Agriculture. Meron namang agencies having allocated with quick response fund. Hopefully in 2 days, ma-finalize namin yung mga early recovery interventions. We really should extend assistance to the affected populations for their early recovery before we carry out or identify long-term rehabilitation and recovery program. Dahil yun ay medyo may katagalan, pinaplano pa yan, and probably mga next year pa ang mga implementations ng mga long-term rehabilitation recovery program. So we're looking at utilizing this 3.2 billion available recovery interventions.
At hindi pa po kasama dyan yung Quinta, no? Yung casualties nung Quinta, yung mga nawalan ng bahay sa Quinta, or paano ba yan? Sinasabay-sabay nyo na ba yan? Kasi patong-patong, may darating pa na Shoni, no? So, parang ang hirap ilarawan kung gaano kabigat ng magiging trabaho ng NDRRMC, even in the short term, no?
Yeah, pinag-usapan namin kahapon na kanina na isabay na natin yung yung naapektuhan ng mga previous disasters, like recently nga itong si Quinta. And then consider na rin natin yung maapektuhan itong ni Shoni.
Yes. So,
Sir? Okay.
Yes, go ahead, Ed.
Well, sir, large swaths of Bicol do not have any power. For example, pati yung mga online classes, siyempre hindi sila makapasok dahil walang kuryente. So marami pong maraming patong-patong na problema na dun sa walang kuryente.
Yeah, hindi lang electrical post ng electric cooperative ang nasira, meron din nasira mga transmission tower ng NGCP, and hopefully yun ang sabi sa atin ng DOE kahapon, 2 months.
Paano yan? Magpapasko sila, sir, ng madilim, no? I mean, kasi 2 months eh. So that we're talking about the end of the year, restoration of power, no? And yeah, paano yan,
so
sir?
Repairment from unaffected electric cooperatives. So nagbo-volunteer na yata yung mga taga Region 1, Region 2 at Region 3 to aid Region 5. So kino-coordinate na yung yung entry nila to Region 5.
Sir, we had a conversation last night with Governor Chis Escudero, and actually, I don't know if it's before the typhoons or talagang ginagawa nila as preparation for typhoons. Pero they removed trees that may fall on power lines. I know you're talking about transmission powers as well na problema, pero it could possibly cut down on the recovery time if walang bumabagsak na poste because of falling trees. Sa Sorsogon po kasi they remove the trees daw that could possibly fall on power lines and topple the posts. Isang puno daw kasi kaya magpatumba ng 10 poste.
Yeah. So ginawa nila yan sa Albay. Ewan ko lang doon sa iba pang areas. And well, napag-usapan naman yan last year, nung nandun kami sa Legazpi after Typhoon Tisoy, and isa nga yan sa nabanggit na kinakailangan gagawin before a typhoon hits or makes landfall. Dapat may trimming na ng mga malalaking kahoy along the highway.
Yeah. Pero
kasama sa preparedness na hindi lang evacuation kundi mga ganun.
Oo. How would you grade us in terms of the forced evacuations this time? Or rather preemptive evacuation. Sumunod naman, no? Was there high compliance so far, as far as you know?
Mataas ang compliance dito sa Bicol Region, lalo na dyan sa Catanduanes and Albay. Well, dahil sa experience nila, at sinabing tatama ang bagyo dyan, may mga experiences na kasi sila.
Yes.
Nasanay
na rin, ano?
Nasanay na. But casualties, doon nga sa kausap ko yung counterpart ko sa Mexico 3 years ago, nagmamalaki nila, Super Typhoon yung tumama sa kanila, but 0 casualties. Dahil nga sa maraming evacuation center, and pag nag-utos ang gobyerno, talagang
sunod. All right. Maraming salamat po sa inyo. Yes.
Thank you, sir. OCD Administrator and NDRMC Director, Usec Ricardo Jalad, sir. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Maraming salamat, Lucy, sa Ed.
Thank you, sir. We will just pause for a break, so please stay with us. Welcome back to the Chiefs. And as promised, we do want to talk about the U.S. elections and the impact of the elections on the Philippines. And for that, we bring in Mr. Dindo Manhit, the president of the think tank Stratbase, Albert Del Rosario Institute. Sir, hi, sir. Thank you po
Hi,
for joining us.
sir.
Hello.
Right. Good evening.
Yes.
Kompleto na yung
Anytime.
barkada. We have with us as well aming pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Robbie Alampay of One News. Sir,
Good evening.
we do want to talk about looking at what
Good
the
evening to
effect.
everyone.
Yes, sir. The effect of whether it's a continuation of Donald Trump or a new president, Joe Biden, in the White House. One politician said, and I'd like to ask you if you think this is an oversimplification. One politician said that the Trump victory would be good for the Philippines but bad for the world. A Biden victory would be bad for the Philippines but good for the world. I don't know if that's an oversimplification. Pero kayo po, what is your perspective?
I think victory will not only be bad for the world, but on the long term, might not even be good for the Philippines, because when we speak of the Philippines, we're not speaking about the Philippine government and its relationship with President Trump, but also the rest of the country, its people, our democratic values, etc. And with Biden, there are three core principles of a Biden presidency. You would see this in a lot. Yeah, you would see this in a lot of their publications. They speak of leading the world in a democracy, reviewing economic security, and even fighting global threats. So I think Biden would be more international. Will build on alliances with other countries, as compared to Trump, that he wants to build it around his image of the world. So I think the world will be better.
Well, Dindo, I mean, question lang, because when you speak of the U.S. regaining its stature, there's a specific philosophy to it, specifically being the leader of the free world, as they say. That's really a mantle that was lost under Donald Trump. If Biden has that specific, it's part of his mission for the U.S. to regain its footing as a leader of the free world, and pushing back on the populist, nationalist trend worldwide of leaders and strongmen. Where does that leave the final 2 years of President Duterte and the Philippines under President Duterte?
Sorry, I lost the last line.
Well,
Robbie?
if part of Biden's mission, if part of a Biden presidency is regaining the stature of the United States as leader of the free world, standing on the principles of democracy and human rights, how will that define his administration's relationship with in our particular case, the final 2 years of President Duterte?
Nawala.
Hindi maganda.
Oo nga. Oo.
We'll try to bring Dindo back in a while kasi medyo naglag eh. Okay raw yung kanina yung signal.
Yeah.
Diba kanina daw yung speed eh. Biglang naglag eh.
Pero interesting, kanina pinapanood natin yung this was part of the report sa Signal. Ito na si Dindo.
Hi, sorry. I have to use mobile. Yeah.
Tama, better yung connection. No. Ulitin ko lang. I mean, if as you said, if a Biden presidency wants to regain America's stature, specifically in the context of America as leader of the free world, standing on on democracy and human rights, how will that define the relationship of a new Biden presidency with the final 2 years of the Duterte administration?
Of course, as I've said earlier, key to the foreign policy of a Biden presidency is they use these two words to reinvigorate democracies around the world. So that will be challenging for a government that has been perceived as one which is illiberal or that has tendency towards authoritarian rules. So they need to balance that core principle with the importance also of maintaining relationship with an ally in in the region, no? Because there are other security matters and also economic matters. So it might take a Biden presidency some very challenging relationship, but maybe they can also help ensure that democracy should reign in the country also. They can maybe not go extreme of really defining the government right now as one that is illiberal, but maybe work on that. Hopefully, the last 2 years we'll see some improvements in terms of democratic.
I mean, to be explicit, the other side of that tightrope, as you pointed out, is the South China Sea, China, and so on. Recently, the president reasserted, and for the first time, asserted and acknowledged our arbitral ruling, pushing against China, having a very strong message, relatively speaking, the strongest message he's had with regards to South China Sea. That sort of gave again a Biden presidency a little more breathing room and a little more confidence to walk that tightrope.
Yes, I think so, because when you look at security or defense matters, I think in Washington, D.C., there is this bipartisan belief that there is importance to strengthening their role in security matters, especially in South China Sea or West Philippine Sea. And you would see that maybe Biden, being a former vice president of President Obama, would have learned their lessons of trying to give some space for China to become good global citizens. But what we have seen, especially after the 2016 arbitral award, is they cannot be good citizens, and they will use their aggressive stance with regards to assessing really their strength or their power in the region. And the U.S., not only the U.S., but the U.S. will be part of a broader coalition, I believe, of like-minded democracies that it has really shaped this past few years. Some call it a quadrilateral approach. That means 4 major powers, Japan, India, the US, and even Australia, with other, some would say, small powers, Korea, Vietnam, New Zealand, working together to ensure a rule-based security environment in the Philippines, and not only the Philippines, but in the region as well.
So, Professor, are you actually seeing any significant shift in foreign policy of the U.S., more specifically toward China, in case of a Biden win?
We maybe it will not be more transactional or personal. Because what has happened with Trump, it's all about him and his belief. But in terms of you'd say hard position with regards to China and its aggressiveness in the region, I think there will be
The same.
it will be the same.
Yes.
But maybe what Biden would do is bring more Asia Pacific country, or what they call now countries within the Indo-Pacific region, to become part of. And we have seen that with actions already coming from the military, the Pacific Command. US, I think even the Philippine government participated in some joint naval exercises with other countries in Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific. So we will see that.
Yeah. Do you think there will actually be a pushback on human rights in the Philippines? Because the U.S. has been working with a lot of strongmen around the world and the populists.
Yeah.
If that's how you define this presidency, no? I mean,
Yes.
they think of their strategic interest as well. And do you think there will be any significant change as a result of the U.S. being, well, we perceive that under a democratic president, it will be more stronger on human rights. You think there will be any significant change in relations with Duterte's administration?
That is the big challenge, because the Democrat, not only Vice President Biden, are known for championing democratic values
Yes.
around the world.
Yeah, but
And
they have to be consistent, di ba?
They,
I mean, if you can work
yeah,
with, for example, the Middle Eastern regimes, for example, certain regimes there anyway, and in other parts of the world, di yan din na sasabihin dito ng Manila, no? Bakit hindi nyo i-criticize yung iba nyong allies? Bakit puro kami?
that's why yan ang magandang tingnan, if ever. But if you've noticed also, as I've said, you have to view it from a purely Republican Democratic stance. from a presidential point of view, but a democratic Congress tends to be more aggressive. So there will be pressure on the part of a Biden presidency from his own
Yes, but
party in
yes,
Congress.
but Dindo, let's look at it from the other side of this relationship. What will be the foreign policy of the Philippines? I mean, going that way naman. How do we need to adjust?
Again, how the message delivery that will come from a new presidency might also shape our own, you'd say, uh, reassessment of our foreign policy. Always remember that we are entering the last year and a half of this government, being challenged by this pandemic. You need all the help possible. And part of, if the US will try to be part or try to go back to being part of a global coalition of democratic countries, you'd see some value to engaging with them from that level. Because when you look at the past 4 years of trade and investment in the Philippines, our own government data will show that all this hype about China only led to more imports coming from China. But in terms of our exports, our investment, it's always been driven collectively by democratic countries or what is called democratic systems of government like Japan, Korea, European Union, the US, Australia. So those are things that you need to assess moving in towards your last year and a half in office with regards to the 30 presidency. How can you build and learn from what has happened for the past 4 years, given the challenges of this pandemic, and work with a new government that might have a different principle as compared to the previous government.
Do you think that the elections in the US, if they turn out to be messy in terms of the credibility, because even now we're seeing Trump posturing that he will question, especially the mail-in votes, no, and he will ask to see it if he loses. And even now, shop owners are boarding up their shops in preparation for what might be a very violent end to it. Will that have some effect on the Philippines, if at all? That kind of scenario?
That kind of scenario will have an effect indirectly because it will weaken further the standing of the United States in the international arena.
And
Uh,
so,
that's why you can expect really you and we have been seeing it. Japan really taking a more aggressive role as pushing certain agendas in the region as a substitute for this lack of leadership from the US. So an illegitimate or question of legitimacy that will drag the US into that kind of problem will really cause some image problem and leadership problem around the world. And that might affect the Philippines, really. And it might be taken into an opportunity by aggressive neighbor like China to further control the region.
what about President Duterte himself? Will he be affected by a Biden presidency going into the 22 elections?
If you would look at details of the so-called core platform of Biden, there might be challenging times for the president because, as I've said, they're they're proud of their belief that they need to go back to the core of the Democratic Party, which is how can they lead in the world, and part of that is how to push and reinvigorate democracies around the world. That they have seen the rise of populist leaders. So, as I've said,
Yes, sir.
these are the challenging things really for as Biden. But of course, Biden will be more challenged by internal politics or internal challenges initially. So they will have maybe a status quo relationship with the Philippines in the next year of President Duterte.
Yun nga sir, nung last few months ni Obama, the president, Duterte had a pretty combative relationship, if you'd call it a relationship pa nga with the
Yes.
outgoing President Obama. I'm wondering lang of course they're not the same people, although they belong to the same party. Meron ba yung some sort of handover ng combative relationship na yan, or we're
Always,
talking about a completely different thing altogether?
always remember the combative relationship of our president was to the audiences like you and me. Because when it went to the international events, he did not even show up in the dinner with Obama.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
again, I view things
The
differently.
fireworks were for the viewers,
He's,
the audience.
he's playing to us, the crowd. But
Mhm.
does it matter to a U.S. president? Maybe not.
Now,
So that's something that we need to see, no? Because it's easy to be combative when you're talking to the Filipino crowd, but there will be international events which Obama had. They had an opportunity to meet in APEC. Remember our president had the
Yes.
stomach ache.
How about in
On the-
terms of the
yeah, on the-
economy, Professor?
So for me, those are things that I look at. Na minsan, it's easy to project, but when you are engaging internationally, that's a different scenario.
How about sa economic policies ni Biden in case he wins? Do you see him actually becoming less inward-looking than Trump? Do you
I
think
think
there will be some changes there? And
I think
can the US afford it?
initially, I think he will still be more inward initially.
Yes.
But again, core to his platform is the desire to build economic security around the world. And they know that at the end of the day, remember, it was the Obama-Biden presidency that pushed for the so-called Trans-Pacific Partnership,
Yes. Now, well,
built biggest trade bloc in the world, and China was not included in that discussion. So Biden was so that kind of thinking, I think, still is in the mind of Democratic Party advisors of Trump, of Biden, that it's critical those kind of alliances, because strong economic are also good, strong security ties. Also, they have viewed things that there's a relationship between economy and defense and security at the global environment.
pero
What
it's
about
more
that?
complicated now, di ba? If you're trying to balance security interests, especially with China, mas mahirap ngayon yung TPP na yan. And China is projecting itself with the Belt and Road Initiative, its own. Di ba? Mas mahirap siya ngayon.
I think it's still the same arena, because not as much as move in terms of the Belt and Road, since TPP was canceled. But always remember that TPP, though the US withdrew, it was continued by Japan. That's why it's now called Comprehensive TPP. And the US will always welcome, according to the new Prime Minister of Japan, Suga, if there's a change of the US. So, but of course, China is trying to rush the so-called RCEP. I don't know if you've heard of that, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So we see that kind of battle. But I believe what will bind countries together, trade and investment-wise, is the core values of democracy. We're seeing that now, especially during this pandemic. You saw the flexing of muscles of some democracies with regards to China's actions, especially with this pandemic, the cover-up that they. And it's not limited to Trump or to his foreign policy, but even European nations, even Asian countries, even Australia, who's a big trading partner of China, making a big stand against China on this issue. So you see that maybe democratic principles will be shaping alliances moving forward.
Okay, now Dindo, we've spent a lot of time speculating about a theoretical Biden presidency.
Yes.
But
Exactly.
let's go back to some baseline as well. I mean, what would be an objective assessment of Donald Trump's performance in the United States? And I ask this in the context of, despite what people may think of him, everybody's still playing it safe. We are still talking about a fairly close elections. Now, if you assume that a lot of the anti-Trump votes has to do with who he is, how he is, and so on, then that still leaves a lot of plus marks. You would assume on the other side, there must be a reason why it's still not something that people are still uh, very careful not to predict. I mean, especially given what happened 4 years ago. So, objectively speaking, ano ba yung standpoint talaga? Did he or did he not do well economically, at least in the United States?
My answers goes beyond economic. He was a highly polarizing and divisive president. And he built a base around that. That could be at least 40% of the American public, and that's a big base. But of course, the global pandemic affected his stature with this base, so it's slowly grown. But when you look at economic data from the U.S., did they really become stronger during the time of President Trump?
Well,
The data
unemployment
shows,
went down.
the data shows
That's what it's always bragging
only
about.
only the stock market went up, but generally, the economy it was consistent with what he inherited with Obama. And even in states where he promised to bring back manufacturing, details of those things. I mean, when you watch reports coming from CNBC or Bloomberg, they like to hype and report on the stock growth, but not on the investment growth. That really creates jobs. That's why has been challenging for Trump really to have a strong showing where he did well before, which is manufacturing areas like the Midwest. So we'll see how it happens at the end of the day. But when you look at the polls, Biden is actually leading more than Hillary Clinton at this time. And this is, I just don't watch CNN. I subscribe to thehill.com, politico.com. There's even there's a group Cook report that looks at different polls. And I think everybody's just afraid to call it that there's a strong showing from Biden, but I think the pandemic really affected the chances of.
You're referring to the popular vote, or you're to the popular vote, or to the electoral college?
Now, even of course, we know that Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes in the popular vote, but in the electoral, people should remember that Trump simply won by 15,000 when he got Pennsylvania, or Michigan by 40,000 votes. Those are small. Parang nanalo ka sa Makati City or sa Pasay City sa atin, di ba? But you got the whole state, which is bigger than the whole Philippines in terms of population. But now, even Biden is leading in those states. So it's really, at the end of the day, what we call vote delivery, or the get out the vote. The polls are there. What happened last time in 2016, those Democrats who did not really like Hillary but wanted Bernie Sanders decided to stay home. So the challenge now, will they stay home in those key states? So that's the battle, really, because at the end of the day, a lot of them are affected. Not that the economy did not really move, and the economy now is suffering more because of this coronavirus.
Okay.
So,
Okay, Professor Dindo Manhit, President of the Albert Del Rosario Institute. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the U.S. elections. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you
Yes.
anytime.
Maraming
Bye.
salamat.
Okay, and now we'd like to welcome our next guest in the last stage of our conversation, De La Salle University Professor of International Studies, Renato De Castro. Good evening, Professor De Castro.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my views regarding this very important topic.
Welcome, sir. Professor, hindi pa namin natatanong siguro you can give us a fearless forecast. Dun sa US, walang gustong mag-fearless forecast. But in your case, baka meron
Napasok sila noong 2016 eh.
Regarding what? I was there. I was there. I was in Washington, D.C. in 2016.
Yes.
So I was there when the earthquake happened. Yeah,
Yes.
I was there. I was also shocked.
Yes.
I was expecting, of course, yung Pennsylvania,
Yes.
Michigan, and of course Wisconsin to be blue. But when I look at the yung
College.
CNN, no, it's red. They turn red. So again, people are generally reluctant, even the Democrats,
Yes.
to make a prediction, because the polls, as mentioned earlier by my we are colleagues, Professor Manhit, we're together in the ADRI. I focus on foreign policy and national security. Of course, he's my boss. He's the president in ADRI. So even the Democrats do not want to forecast, because you might have, again, this surprise that happened in 2016. Again, this is a case of the United States. Popular votes actually do not matter. It's the Electoral College.
Yes.
That really matters.
Okay.
So kayo, anong tingin nyo?
Ano to eh, ito yung, I think another thing.
Kala ko hindi mo na ipupush it.
Just only one fact, no? This is not my area. This is really domestic politics. Because as an academic, I should really focus on talaga my cup of tea is foreign policy. But ang path lang ni Donald Trump, of course, is to get Florida. If he doesn't get Florida, that's the end. Because everybody is doubting that he might have, again, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Because as Professor Manhit mentioned, his lead was very narrow in those three states.
But sir, that's if he doesn't get Florida. What if he gets Florida?
Then he has a chance. Biden has a lot of options.
Okay. Now, Professor, let's
to get that 270 electoral votes.
Now, Professor, let's go to foreign policy. Kanina, we spent a lot of time with Dindo talking about, as we said, I mean, hypothetically, we spent a lot of time talking about Joe Biden. What if si Joe Biden ang manalo? And we premised a lot of that on the assumption that, you know, are we expecting change? But on the other side of that, is it wrong or oversimplifying it to assume na if it's Trump, it's the status quo? Or kung si Trump ang manalo, are we also expecting some kind of change?
Well, again, when we talk about foreign policy at this stage, no, especially, let's say in the first, give it up to about 100 days, foreign policy will be formulated in terms of intention. So this might be his intention, but we simply don't know what will happen. So that's usually the case of foreign policy. Foreign policy are simply intentions, but then something would happen, and then goes your intention. Like, for example, I'll give you a case in point. Now, President Barack Obama in 2011 announced his rebalancing to Asia.
Yes,
And of course, you have the ISIS.
yes.
And of course, it was diverted by what happened in Ukraine. So it affected, of course, his foreign policy. President, of course, Donald Trump, America first. It antagonized the people in Europe, the NATO allies, but when it comes to Asia, by 2017, he had to back off because of the strategic competition with China. So this is, again, we have to be very wary when we talk about this will be his foreign policy. And another point, of course, is foreign policies like that provides our leaders opportunities. If our leaders would take advantage of their opportunities, that, of course, that's another matter. So ayun yung being the caveat regarding, this will be the foreign policy of Joe Biden. Of course, he would talk about his intentions. You know, what are basically his intentions? And of course, he's been very clear. Number one, he would adopt a more multilateral approach. In contrast, of course, to Donald Trump's America First. He would try, this was mentioned by my colleague, Dr. Manhit, that he would try to at least maintain the liberal international order, which a lot of Americans, liberal Americans, Democrats said, Donald Trump is undermining it. Of course, a case in point is in terms of the alliances. Of course, since the United States, during the Cold War, the time of President Truman, the alliances are considered sacrosanct. No, they're important. The United States will have to pay the cost of those alliances. Donald Trump's approach was, of course, transactional. In most alliances, especially in Europe, but not in Asia. And of course, ito yung case sa Pilipinas. Definitely not with the alliance with the Philippines. It's never been transactional. In fact, ayun yung dinidiscuss ko, the Trump administration has exercised strategic patience and understanding when it comes to the Philippine-U.S. alliance.
Why was that? I'm curious. Why was that? Why did he make an exception for the Philippines?
Number one, this already began. No? I mean, I mentioned ni Professor Manhit kanina kay Barack Obama, no, nung nagkaroon sila ng problema sa Laos, then of course President Duterte announced that, you know, in Beijing last year, I'm cutting all my ties with the United States, Russia and China, here I come. So ang umano dito, pumasok dito yung bureaucracy, the defense and the State Department. They play a very important role. They provide advice to the president. So nangyari na yon. Then of course, when Donald Trump entered the picture, when he won the election, as early as December, 2016, he made a phone call to President Duterte, said, I'm okay with your war on drugs. In fact, I want a working relation with you. Followed by another phone call around May 2017. I want to make operationalize our alliance, so forth and so on. Then nangyari, of course, yung Marawi incident. That's when the time that President Duterte realized that he could not simply drop the United States as a hot potato. Then you have this very accommodating approach by Donald Trump. I think it has something to do with the fact that both individuals hate Barack Obama and they like each other. They're both populists.
Okay.
So may personal dimension then. I don't know whether the personal dimension will be there, of course, once you have a Biden.
I see.
Sa level na niya, really personal relationship does matter. President Trump simply could not get along, for example, with Chancellor Merkel. He could get along with Boris Yeltsin. His relationship with former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was, of course, better than Shinzo Abe's relation with Barack Obama. So at that level, in fact, personal rapport does matter.
Okay, so can you at least forecast or project what kind of a personal relationship he would probably have with President Duterte or the president following Duterte in 2022? Do you think that he will make a 180-degree turn compared to President Trump now when it comes to relationship with the Philippines?
I think this is my take, no? This is my 10 cents worth of take, just in case, of course, our relationship. I don't think the personal rapport would be there between just in case.
None. Yeah.
Because President Biden is very close. I'm sorry, former Vice President Biden. I'm not assuming that is very close with no less than Barack Obama. And just look at the relationship between Barack Obama and President Duterte.
Well, let me phrase it this way. Let me phrase it coming from the other side. How different is the President Duterte, the newly elected President Duterte, that President Obama had to deal with? And how different is that guy from the President Duterte on the final 1.5 years that a President Joe Biden will have to deal with?
Number one, of course, President Barack Obama started with a wrong foot. He basically calculated that President Duterte would listen to his, advice regarding human rights. Plus another calculation of President Duterte. That's why, he was kind of confrontational with Barack Obama at that time. President Barack Obama was already a lame duck president. Plus, of course, certain dynamics that happened there in Laos, so forth and so on. In this situation, this is again my take. They will have to approach the relationship from a really business-like manner, because I think Joe Biden has already learned the lesson of what happened, that he could not simply raise human rights issue publicly. Probably it would have to be done closed door, privately. Plus, of course, he also have to take into account the strategic competition with China. I don't think that will end with a Biden administration. It would continue because the root cause is really coming from American societal. Plus, of course, you have defense, you have the State Department, have a survey conducted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies a few weeks ago. And the finding is, of course, a majority of the Americans consider China as a clear and present danger. So, yun yung mangyayari. This is how I project. I might be wrong, because a lot of things would happen. Again, this will depend on who will be appointed by, just in case, again, he wins, who will he appoint as the National Security Advisor, as the Secretary of the Department of State, as the Secretary of the Department of Defense. And of course, on the side of the Philippines, I have noticed that the Duterte administration has also been sending signals.
What kind of signals?
For example, the suspension of the termination of the visiting forces agreement.
Okay.
The acknowledgement of the arbitral ruling by then Secretary Locsin.
Okay.
Then the ANC interview with Secretary Locsin when he, for the first time, a ranking cabinet member of the Duterte administration acknowledged the importance of the alliance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remember this?
So kumakambyo na sila.
Yeah,
Ang tanong, yes. Ang tanong ko naman, paano kung manalo on the perchance that President Trump gets a second term? Will he suffer the same fate as all second termers? Will he be a lame duck president? And how will that affect the relationship with the Philippines?
He'll be a lame duck president 4 years from now, 3 years from now. So for first 3 years, first 3 years, I think the Philippines will still be a very important partner because of the strategic competition with China. I think this is the when we look at American foreign policy, it's not directed to small or middle-sized country like the Philippines. It's directed to big countries like the United States.
Yeah.
It so happened that
We're talking now
Speaking of China,
pre-election, ano? Kaya itong buwan natin is a Biden win eh. So in a Trump re-election, may mga nag-aalala naman, Filipinos, especially Filipinos relatives in the US, about Trump's immigration policy. You think he will push through with it? Na he even more inward-looking and push through with this hardline immigration policies, including toward Filipinos, their traditional allies?
He might push with it, but of course, you look at the American system, check and balance. We'll have to pass a law that will be, of course, the legislation will be passed by Congress. It will also depend again on whether the both houses of the Congress are controlled by the Republicans. I doubt it will happen. So this is the nature of the American system, check and balance, separation of power, the same system that we have. You have cases of gridlock, you have cases of paralysis, or in the case even in the United States, Donald Trump has been complaining about what he called the deep state, that his policies are being opposed by the bureaucrats, right? Like, for example, Dr. Fauci, right? His former defense secretary, Secretary Mattis, who called his boss, the defense secretary who called his boss, he has a mind, when it comes to defense issue, he has a mind of an 8-year-old child.
Hey, Prof, balikan ko lang ang China because, as they all say, we're caught between these two giants. To which president, a President Trump or a President Biden, to which president might China be more, shall we say, either more aggressive, more stressed, more antsy, more given to testing the waters?
In the case, of course, of President Trump, this is a case of, this is a Moroccan saying, it's better to deal with a devil you know than a devil you don't know. So at this point in time for them, at least they know the movement of Trump. Although President Trump is highly unpredictable, but they know it. Joe Biden might be a more dangerous element here because chances are he would improve relationship with NATO, and NATO might be interested in coming into the Indo-Pacific. So that will complicate matters for China. And ito yung sinasabi usually, and this is based on history. If you look at history, all major wars fought by the United States in the 20th century happened under a Democratic administration. First World War, Woodrow Wilson. Second World War, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Korean War, President Truman. Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson.
But Iraq was under the Republicans.
Oh, the Republicans. So, ayun, Iraq under the Republicans.
Iraq was under the Republicans.
But in the major wars, right? The 4 major wars. First World War, Second World War, Korean War, Vietnam War. All under Democratic administration.
Why do you think, sir? Why do you think? Could that be some coincidence or no?
Generally, of course, Democrats would become more activists when it comes to foreign policy. They become more activists. They rely on, of course, importance of ideals like human rights. Right? Those are issues that would really irritate China. In contrast to Republicans who are actually more conservative, except of course during the time of George W. Bush. But again, you have to put into account the 9/11 incident in 9/11. So we see a very dynamic world. The world is changing. So this is something that would be very constant. The fact right now we are in the middle of this strategic competition.
Okay.
Yung fearless forecast mo na.
Oo nga.
Oo, baka bukas bago ng mundo natin, ha?
Well, what can we do about it? Right?
When you called Biden President Biden, was that already your fearless forecast?
Ayun yung
Or,
fearless
that was
forecast.
Again, like most Democrats in the even Joe Biden himself, they're still haunted by the memory of 2006.
Yes.
And again, of course, ito yung point ko, no? Whatever action they would do, whether it's Democrat, Republican, it will not be for our interests. It will be for their country's interests.
Yeah.
So ano lang natin dito is how our leadership would look at this. No? It really boils down on the perception of our leaders would take advantage of the foreign policy of the United States, the foreign policy of China, so forth and so on. Because as the smaller powers, we could only take advantage of opportunities, but we cannot create those opportunities ourselves.
Okay.
All right.
Professor Renato De Castro de la Salle University International Studies Professor. Sir, thank you po for
And I'm
joining us tonight.
also linked with
Salamat,
ADR.
Prof.
Oh, yes, sir.
Si Dindo yung, thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you,
Thank you, sir.
Prof.
Thank you, Professor. No. Ayan na.
Talagang ang galing umiwas.
Oo nga eh.
Hindi mo pa amin, no?
Pero yung discussion natin, President Biden na tayo, ah.
Totoo naman yan. If you recall 4 years ago, di ba? Everybody assumed tapos na ang boxing.
Diyos
I
ko.
remember the morning after.
OMG lahat. OMG. All the major pollsters talo. Kaya, well, at least exciting bukas yung laban.
Ano ba
Bukas,
oras
ngayon na.
matatapos?
Ngayon na. Ongoing na.
Ngayon, ongoing na.
Anong,
Yes.
kailan
It's 8:30 in the morning in the East Coast.
Yeah, but what I want to know is exactly how the counting of the mailed-in ballots will happen. Di kasi katulad dati, it was all
Kaya nga
practically
eh.
electronic kaya mabilis.
Kaya
So,
nga, kini-question ni Trump ngayon eh. Gusto
Kaya
niya raw
nga,
makita.
kaya medyo magulo.
Mm.
Those
Pero
are
ano nga, kung matalo siya, questionin niya. Pero pag natalo siya, andyan, hindi na niya questionin.
Kaya naka-board up yung mga tindahan doon ngayon.
Kaya nga eh. Nakakatakot eh.
Baka magpasok yung mga American refugees dito sa Pilipinas, di ba?
Malayo lang yung bago travel ngayon.
Okay.
Okay. Sige.
okay.
Well, that's it for tonight. Watch the U.S. election coverage on of One News, Channel 8 and Channel 250, starting 8 in the morning with Agenda with Chito Beltran, up until The Chiefs with Robbie Alampay tomorrow night. So that will be all for this special edition of The Chiefs. We hope to discuss here will keep the conversation going. I'm Edwin Gao for News.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Robbie Alampay. We are One News.